Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this in-depth ag forecast for Australia. We're going to do things a little bit out of order in this forecast video. I'm going to start off with the bigger picture, longer range, then we'll kind of work our way back to the short-term stuff. And I'm just going to preface what I'm going to tell you tonight by saying every single long-range weather forecast that you're going to be able to find is going to just tell you that spring is going to be wet. And the big reason for that is what's going on with our ocean temperatures right now. So we have seen strong trade winds reemerge over the last several weeks, in fact months, into the central equatorial Pacific. You can see the size of the western warm pool and how it continues to grow. We've also seen upwelling here off the coast of Africa, approaching India. And these are all kind of classic signs of an emerging La Niña-like pattern. And whenever there is a La Niña-like signal at all, the seasonal forecasts that come out, so we're looking out months ahead, they're always just going to reflect it. And if there's an El Nino, they're just going to do that. They tend to latch on to the biggest, most dominant factors, which are going to be the changes in behavior of the ocean temperature. So is there really a La Nina happening? Well, by some accounts, you could say yes. If you just look right out there, here, in the equatorial Pacific, right in the middle of it, Niña region 3.4, yeah, the ocean temperatures are now, 0.6 degrees Celsius below average, and that is well past the threshold we typically use of a half degree. And so we are seeing, the effects. And are the winds behaving that way? Sure. This is one of the ways by which we look at those winds across the equatorial Pacific. Okay, so that would be here. Wherever you see those cooler colors, like we've had for a while, and we're going to continue to see in the forecast, that just indicates stronger trade winds coming out of the east. And that is the telltale sign of a La Nina. So why am I telling you all of the forecasts are going to be wet? It's because September through November, when we historically correlate weather patterns against El Nino or La Nina, you tend to get this. And it tends to park the MJO somewhere here. All right. We tend to just get stronger flow, better rising motion in this area. In fact, we end up developing winds that tend to do something like this. So we get into very dry pockets here, drier pockets there, and just better access to moisture. And that is why for most of Australia, maybe save Western Australia, we tend to be wetter. And it's some of the strongest correlations on the planet. So that's what this is. So that is why there's so much attention paid to El Nino and La Nina. Now, just a brief thing to pick up on here. Elsewhere around the world, India tends to be late in the monsoon ending. It tends to last quite a bit longer into India. Take note, the United States tends to be drier across our cotton belt, across our southwestern United States. We even tend to have drier conditions in the central U.S. as well. But that's our harvest time frame, not too big of a problem there. You look over here, it tends to be an early start to the South American monsoon, which tends to drive the planting season earlier and earlier. And I'm waiting to find out if this year they've been given permission to plant soybeans on September the 1st. I'm curious to see if they got that permission. Normally it's the 15th, but if it's the 1st, it's just, 12 days away, and they'll be able to plant. We will be questioning how the winter wheat season finishes down in Australia, how things in Argentina. And we'll also pay attention to what's going on in southern Brazil for the risk of drought. But history would tell me that if La Nina is in the cards, this is most likely the weather patterns that will result. So thinking about it, if you look back over the last 5 years, so 2020 to 2024, 4 of those years had La Nina-like patterns, and only one, 2023 into 2024, had an El Nino. And so we've seen this pattern more often than we've not seen it. And that's why when you stitch together the ocean temperatures, very pronounced Pacific warm pool, colder water here representing those stronger trade winds. And that is why over that time frame, if you just kind of look at the composite precipitation anomalies of 2020 to 2024, you're not going to find much of Australia showing a dry signal. In fact, we've been wetter than average over that time span here for September, October, November. And look, India's been wetter. The central United States has been drier. There's been an early start. That's what we're seeing right there, to the monsoon. A lot of these things start to stack up and add up. So I bring all that to your attention because our forecast models are suggesting once again that we're going to go into a La Nina time frame, and this is what you end up getting for the September, October, November forecast from the newest iteration of the European model in its seasonal update. So what does it have? It's got, look, the drier here and here, the rising motion in between. See that? That's where they're going to park that MJO. We tend to be wetter throughout much of Australia. The signals are weakest in Western Australia. India's wetter, China's wetter, the central United States, overall drier signal, early start to the monsoon. That's That's just the story that this is going to continue to carry. And it's not just this longer range model. It is also in the National Multi-Model Ensemble. Can you see the same patterns? Look where we've got wetter, here and here. Look where we see drier, and back again to wetter. So nearly all long-range forecast models are looking the same way. And big question we're going to have is this the real deal? I mean, is it an actual La Nina-like pattern where we get into, the historical correlations, or is it going to have another flavor? And I'm going to be skeptical of this for these reasons. One, BOM is calling for the same thing. All right, so they've got wetter east and they've got drier west. All right, I see why they're doing that. It kind of follows the same narrative. But how strong is this going to be? Let me shrink this up so you can see it. This is the newest forecast by NOAA, National Weather Service here. And they're saying that the likelihood into September, October, November, December of La Nina being the most dominant factor is like 55 to 58%. In other words, we're not seeing these blue bars way up here. And if they were, I would be much more on the bandwagon of, get ready. It's probably going to rain, and we're going to be seeing above average precipitation, and it's going to be a wetter spring overall. So I'm just going to be a bit skeptical on that until I have evidence to kind of overthrow it. You look lately and you see this, right? In the last 20 days, or the first 20 days of August, what have we seen? We've been very dry into this region. We've had some pockets in Queensland that have been drier. We're drier around, key productive areas in South Australia. And we just keep coming back to the same narrative that I've had for the last, 3 or 4 months, it feels like. And the question is, what is the pressure pattern doing in response to all of these other factors, La Nina being one of them? And what we've seen the first 20 days of this month is that we've built in more often than not large areas of high pressure here. And that's just kind of driven flow like this, exacerbating the rain shadow effect we can get in Victoria, New South Wales, which is why we see drier conditions here. It's just on the wrong side of the mountains. Now, we've been able to get better moisture into pockets of the interior, closer to average. And yes, Western Australia has had several fronts that have swiped through to help out. But until we get, just a deep low racing across this area rather than big areas of high pressure sitting and spinning, that is what we're going to continue to deal with on precipitation. And I want to show it to you. This is what, the first 3.5 weeks of this month has shown. This is the anomalous low level wind. And there it is. And that particular setup floods the coast, drier in the interior, tends to not give us strong, precipitation signals in Queensland. And unless you have fronts coming through Western Australia, then we just tend to be drier. Right now, we've even got it. I mean, take a look. This is the current wind pattern, and there's yet another high pressure cell sitting here. There's very heavy rainfall that's falling along this area. And yeah, there's a front that's sneaking through, but where's the moisture that it's able to use to really produce meaningful precipitation? Let's go have a look at that precipitation. Now, it's just a shade after 7 a.m. Adelaide time, and we are watching. You can kind of see it right here along the coast. There's those showers. And some of this, there's actually some thunder just off the coast here with some of these storms. But this is not the right setup if we're trying to deliver more rainfall across some of these areas that so far in the month of August have gone drier. So we're going to keep an eye on this and kind of figure out where we think it might go here in the near term. But I'm just going to tell you, watch the pressure patterns now. As we get later into spring and summer, things are going to transition to more of a tropical view of things rather than an extratropical view. In other words, we're going to watch the stuff that's up here versus the stuff that's down here. But as it stands, it's going to be the stuff farther to the south to keep a close eye on. So here it is. If I just kind of take a look at where we need to be, let's just get this queued up. There we go. That's about 9:30 this morning here on Thursday. So there's our high pressure cell sitting right there, and there's your flow around it. Now, we're getting a pretty good drink of rain here, but that front that's on the back side, this is just nothing as it comes through later on this morning into this afternoon and evening. And what I'm curious about is some of the forecast models, the European model included, as that high pressure cell moves over toward New Zealand, it's trying to spin up a little bit of a low pressure center right here. While our next system comes into Western Australia. Where are we in time? This would be late in the evening on Saturday, the 23rd. So playing it forward, I'm waiting to see if we can get one of these systems out of the west to really just rip through parts of South Australia, get this rain back into these areas in the interior of Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria. And so as I go, again, this is Saturday and a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. The models are trying to bring, by next Tuesday afternoon and evening, some moisture back into this region, but it's not overly aggressive on the rainfall totals. And then after that, what we're watching is a pretty sizable transition. You see, the beginning of this time period and a lot of August had a lot of high pressure here. And what you notice is that now we're talking about deeper lows. These are gone. And that switch could give us a very interesting finish to the month. And unfortunately, because of the placement of that, I'm not so sure it's going to be a wet finish to the end of the month for a lot of us in Australia. But let's go ahead and add up that total precipitation just to get an idea about what we're seeing here. So if we start adding this up, coastal regions, flood risk. Okay. Interior regions, drier, but there is some moisture getting back this far to the west. Our frontal boundary by this weekend has already moved through. We're bringing in some moisture here. We know we have a system early next week. Ready? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday coming into the west. Now, I want to eke as much moisture out of this as we possibly can, but watch as the front fails to kind of really deliver heavy rains into parts of South Australia or over into parts of Victoria, New South Wales. And through this whole time period, a lot of Queensland is left out of this. It's very much a drier time frame here over the next 10 days or so. Thinking about this a bit further, this is just the next 7 days in terms of precipitation anomalies. So yeah, we're 5 to 10 mil wetter than average here. Some places along the coast are 70 to 90 millimeters wetter than average. But there are still some drier pockets in some key growing areas that we need to see filled in with this particular setup. But I mentioned the pressure patterns are what's key to understanding what's going on right now. So I just want to show it to you another way. The color coding on here is not temperature, it is pressure. And we're looking at an ensemble of model runs from the European. So that's the high pressure cell I'm talking about. Now, as I play it forward, okay, we start to see that by this weekend, there's the low that comes through and brings in the frontal boundary late this week into the weekend into Western Australia. And I would like it if that low would just stay close to the coast or even get farther inland, but it doesn't. It's here, but I need these lower pressure values to be much closer to the coast by the time we get into next Tuesday, Wednesday. It will be bringing rain. You just saw it a moment ago. But what will be interesting to see is as we get out there to next Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the models start to build in high pressure here while keeping a lot of lower pressure there. Now, if this was any farther to the north, we'd be talking about rains. This would be a very wet signal. But as it stands, that week 2 time frame is not overly wet. Can you see where the wettest signals are? They're down here closer to that low, and we're drier in some of our key growing areas as we get into week 2. Most of the models are saying the same thing. So that's kind of how this near-term pattern is playing out. So like I said, every long-range model you're going to see is going to be, wet, wet, wet. Why? La Niña. But these individual high and low pressure systems that just roll across the south right now are really what's taking hold of the pattern as we finish August and start to get into September. And September is a huge wild card I'm going to get to in just a few seconds. First, I would like to show you the temperature pattern. This is the overall temperature pattern over the next 5 days. Again, warmer than average, cooler. And what you're going to notice as I transition to day 5 through 10, after that front comes through, we're knocking temperatures back here in a big way. Some places here are 6-7 degrees C below average. A lot of the warmth is staying up in Queensland or, much farther to the north. As we go out there day 10 through 15, a lot of Australia is going to be experiencing near normal to cooler than normal conditions. And you say, well, why? The reason why is that we brought low pressure systems in here, kicking out the highs. So the net effect is we tend to get cooler air in place across a lot of Australia. All right, that seems to be the way it's setting up. I do want to mention, since I keep talking about these lows cutting to our south, that there are some wind issues I want to pay attention to. As we play this forward through the end of this week into early next week, that next front that comes through, look at it, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The cumulative wind gusts here are getting pretty high. We start to see some places having maximum wind gusts in the 40 to 50 mile an hour range, with a few pockets approaching 60 miles an hour. So I want you to be aware that with a couple of these next systems, we are getting some stronger winds. Okay, so I started off long range. We just kind of quickly covered the near term. Let's go back to that medium range, if you don't mind. I was curious, and so I went back and looked at the temperatures in September just to notice if there are any trends across Australia's growing regions. And to be honest, since about 1980, there's a bit of an upward trend in spring temperatures. Is it much? No, it's about a half degree. But there's an upward trend I think we should be aware of, because I think that's going to influence some of the longer term forecasts. Overall from the 40s to about the 80s, we were relatively flat. And then just lately, we've seen a slight uptick in these temperatures. Okay, from there, what about precipitation? Now, what I do notice about precipitation is there's no discernible September trend. But when you look back over the last 15 years, we've had some pretty wild swings. A few very wet Septembers like 2010, getting over here to 2016 and 2022. Now, is there any correlation with La Nina and El Nino with that? No. 2016, we were coming off of a big El Nino year. 2010, we were going into a La Nina year. And 2022 was a La Nina. So you can see that you've got all varieties. The bigger consequences of an El Nino La Nina start to happen once we get into October all the way through next March. Okay, so that's when this plays out. So I wanted you to see the historical data so you can put it in the context of maybe what's driving the near term. I have a feeling that the MJO's position, which seems to want to just slide around and come back to live a lot in phases 2 and 3, maybe over into phase 1 at times, is going to be a bigger, more dominant driver of the near-term forecast. The Bureau of Meteorology's index, which uses their Access S2 model, they're bringing the MJO right now into phase 3, 4, and then sweeping it back to phases 1 and 2. And I think it's important to take note of that because what did I tell you all the long-range forecasts are going to be? They're going to be wet. Yet, if the MJO dominates, take a look. Phases 1 and 2, okay, phase 3, this is where you have what we just saw, more anomalous flow like this, keeping things drier here and even drier over in parts of Western Australia. So what we would need is the MJO to get out of that. We need the MJO to go back over to these phases where it spent time in July, right? Remember that? And it was that time period that we saw better movement of our high and low pressure systems, and as a result, better chances of rain, and we kind of broke some of the longer standing drought problems. But if the MJO comes back over to this area, take a look at the new forecast. Watch. Now, I know this is an ugly map, but it's going to tell you the story. This is how things are panning out now, right? We have one big high pressure cell. This isn't temperature, it's pressure moving. And there's the low sneaking through this, driving in that front that's bringing in some of the rain, right? As I just go out farther into week 2, see the high pressure coming in behind this? That's the cooler weather, and that is the drier weather. What I don't like is that the farther I go out into September, the model seems to want to maybe keep higher pressure between, the east coast of Australia and New Zealand, but it is not driving these lows farther and farther to the north. And I think it's because of that, if we zip in and just look at Australia specifically and just say, show me what the month of September is going to look like. There it is. That's all of September. Now, this is now. There's the front coming through right now. There is the wet weather along the coast. I'm getting this out there to all of September. And you take note that there's still a wetter signal here, a little bit wetter along the coast of Queensland, but it's not an overly wet signal for the rest of Australia. And I want to compare and contrast that to what's going on here with BOM. Their forecast is very wishy-washy. Notice that they're not going toward one end of the chance of exceeding median rainfall or the other. Their biggest trends come out in that 3-month forecast when you get into October. See that? That's October now starting to give you the La Nina-like signal. So what I want to tell you is in the near term, this is what you got to pay attention to. Watch to see whether we build high or low pressure here. That will determine the success of fronts coming along the south, and that will determine how the flow comes around and when it exits. That's our main story now. As we watch the MJO shift around and move, we could start to change the distribution of those highs and lows, but as it stands, the overall signal based on the MJO is not to be overly wet in these areas, okay? That's what I want to make the point of. So my forecast right now is pretty bearish on rainfall overall for the month of September. But I want you to remember that in the very near term, like what's going on today, we're extremely wet into this area. And we have a couple of fronts coming through. So it's not a completely bone dry forecast, okay? So all of that is being said just to remind us of where we started. As you get farther and farther out into this forecast, you're going to hear more discussion about the influence of La Nina as we get fully into spring and then start to work our way towards summer. And it's a question of whether or not we get our typical La Nina behavior. So I'm going to leave it at that. You know what I'm watching. Let's just keep an eye on it together, and we'll just pick this up again in a couple of weeks. Appreciate your attention. Thanks.